earmuffs for dogs that jump out of airplanes. What's that?
That is a real requirement. The Small Business Innovation Research Program allows for the government to invest in this case, earmuffs for dogs who jump out of airplanes, right, with Special Operations Forces.
Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize Podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Hamm. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, sponsored by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Hamm, and today we are lucky to have an expert in all of the non-traditional acquisition authorities, and particularly the SBIR SBIR authority with reauthorization coming up. This is an opportunity to dig deep into how the government's moving into non-traditional acquisitions, and particularly like the methodologies and how they work. So we have Angela Donahoo, Angie, here on the podcast. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. So we known each other for a long time, and I know your original background, but I want to get the story on not just ordinary contracting, but then not just ordinary contracting, but like you established how to do regular, federal acquisition as a contracting officer, and then it changed. Like the move from, I do schedule buys, I do, FedSim task orders, I do oral presentations, I do all, ordinary stuff, to like, all right, there's this other thing out there that we had never heard of. Like, can you tell me about how that happened?
Sure. Well, as you just sort of alluded to, I started my acquisition career straight out of college into one of the leadership development, career development programs at the time called the Federal Career Intern Program, SCIP. There's been a lot of names for programs like those over the year, but a rotational junior program to move you through a lot of different aspects of a function within government, in this case, government contracting, and train you along the way, move you up the GS ladder as you go. And through that program, I touched telecom contracts that at the time I had no idea even probably what I was really doing, but we did it. GSA schedules contracts, so working with offers, price lists, commercial, the most favored customer and MVC clauses, et cetera. And as you mentioned, landed at FedSim in GSA, where I worked with you and, a lot of really smart and talented people at GSA doing really big, complex acquisitions for government agencies. I was a contracting officer. I kind of managed to get my hands into a lot of different pots, right? I did project management and program management functions. I did rotations to be a technical evaluator instead of being a contracting officer. So I feel like I got pretty lucky in that I wasn't just a contract specialist, just a contracting officer. I would learn those functions, execute on them, and then either get pulled into a special project or raise my hand and say, hey, I'm kind of ready to try the next thing. So I became kind of multi-trained across the acquisition, all of the different buckets, right? The program side, the customer side. In 2016-ish timeframe, you ask, how did I pivot from sort of traditional acquisitions to more of the innovation, ecosystem, non-traditional buying side of government? 2016 timeframe, I had just gotten my MBA, was feeling like, hey, I've been at government for a long time. If I don't make a move now, will I ever? Who knows, right? Took a leap, exited GSA for about a year and a half. I did contracts management and proposal support at a big consulting firm who was doing work with the federal government, right? And it was very hands-on. It was working with partners, was working with the solution architects, writing price proposals, got to see the industry side, of some contract management, everything, right? Um, Around that time, 2016 through about, I'd say, mid 2017, the government started to shift. They stood up DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, DIUX at the time. And it was right about that time that I got a knock from, I think you, right, saying, hey, would you be interested in coming back? We have some new authorities that are kind of popping up here. We want to pilot them within the FedSim organization, sort of this, we have our processes, we have our templates, we have the baseline knowledge. Now, can we apply that to new things and maybe set up a little lab, if you will, a team, a pilot team to try the new authorities? And I said yes, came back into government. Formally came back in as a contracting officer, but quickly, again, pivoted into more of a program management, kind of had my hands in all aspects as we learned, that authority at stake was the commercial solutions opening for GSA, which GSA received in 2018. We didn't, it was kind of a surprise to GSA at the time. We were able, right, to partner with DIUX, who at the time was executing on a brand new CSO process, commercial solutions opening. They needed help with the production side of that. They were doing other transaction authorities. Is very new at the time. We've heard some former colleagues, right, who I've worked with along the way, who were the implementers and the writers of that process. They needed help with the production side. So they wanted to partner with somebody who knew how to do the big production contracts. Well, that was FedSim and GSA in general. So around that time, I was able to sit with the people who were creating the CSO processes at DIUX and bring those back to GSA to not recreate the wheel, because it was a brand new wheel, right? And start to implement those at GSA. So we were able to stand up processes, templates. How is a CSO process going to work at GSA quite quickly, because we had some very smart people helping us and the right tools to execute and the right, I'd say, like leadership environment that was going to let us pilot this stuff in a manner that mitigates risk, but also has your back, right, when you try new things, because that's one of the kind of pulls and tugs. So that was my, I'd say leaving GSA, getting pulled back into GSA right at the time where we were gifted these new authorities via an NDAA, one sentence of law stamped into authority. Good timing and, the right sort of, it's the right opportunity at the time.
And so let's talk about, there's certain FAR references that you're used to when you're, doing an acquisition plan for as an ordinary contracting officer. You're doing FAR Part 8, FAR Part 16, FAR Part 15, FAR Part 12. There's default things that you went to a management concepts class, when you got your warrant, these things. And then you go to a conference and somebody mentions to you that they need to do something that's non-traditional, it's developmental, and it's potentially buying earmuffs for dogs that jump out of airplanes. What's that?
Yeah. So that is a real requirement that has circulated, right, to get bids through the SBIR program, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. It is quite the buzzword these days with the authority lapse and a lot of people kind of poking their heads into what was that, because it was really taking off right before, I'd say, we had this pause in authority, which I think we'll get to later. But the Small Business Innovation Research Program allows for the government to invest in a non-dilutive way, what is out there in terms of R&D and current commercial products. So in this case, let's say 6-7 years ago, there was definitely a SOCOM-related SBIR topic that was looking for the the latest and greatest in whether it's fabric or the shape of the earmuffs, but yeah, earmuffs for dogs who jump out of airplanes, right, with special operations forces, whether that's a SEAL team, etc., they have the dog with them. The dog needs the protection as they jump out of a helicopter. But how do you buy that stuff, and how do you make sure it's the latest and greatest? I mean, it's a fun example of all of the different things that the government needs to buy, but they want to buy it in the very best way, and they understand that these innovations exist out there, and that the companies who make these innovative products or could pivot their current commercial product to a DoD use case, those companies don't typically like to do business with the government because it's very hard to respond to a 50-page solicitation, pages and pages of clauses and compliancy things that are quite difficult. And for maybe a startup or a commercial company might say, yeah, no thanks, that seems too hard. Authorities like the Small Business Innovation Program, SBIR, STTR, also part of that. And now CSOs and these other sort of non-traditional authorities attempt to lower that bar, make it easier for these companies to get that first contract with the government in a way that is friendly to them in both clauses, getting to keep their IP, things that are important to startups and, small businesses and large businesses alike.
So let's do a quick summary of them. So there's 2 programs associated with SBIR Sitter. Let's do what the acronym is and what are the differences between the 2.
So it people, I think, say the SBIR program, but it includes, when a lot of people talk about this, it includes the other portion, which is STT, the Small Business Technology Transfer, SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research Program. SBIR is the larger pot of funds, right? It is essentially a piece of law that in the past has required certain agencies to set aside a percentage of their extramural R&D budget to invest in small business American innovation across a variety of topics. This could be in medical devices, healthcare. DoD use cases is a really big one. So the bigger your R&D budget as an agency, the larger your percentage as well. The percentage is the same, but it means that the pot of dollars, right, gets a little bit bigger if your R&D budget is bigger in general. These agencies are required to establish this program and to spend a certain amount of money investing in small businesses. And for SBIR, for SBIR, those range in awards that could be a 3-month contract for $50,000. It could be a 6-month contract that's $175,000. Or it could go a little bit larger if your product is more higher TRL level, closer to commercialization. Maybe it already exists and it needs to be tailored to a DoD or other agency use case. That could be called a phase 2. So it's structured in these phases where the government has flexibility, right, to buy the idea on paper for a smaller dollar value and invest in the company to then work on that idea, or invest in the company at a later stage, like a SBIR phase 2 contract where you're now maybe piloting, you're tailoring for a use case, or maybe you're starting this production cycle. STTR, the difference, right, would be that the companies who are applying into the program need to have typically an education partner. So an MIT, there's a ton out there, right? But an EDU partner or an other sort of nonprofit partner as part of their proposal. And the STTR budgets are smaller than the SBIR budgets, but they are just as important, and a lot of companies are successful in that route.
So you'd mentioned SBIR agencies. There's a list of them. So there's these topics. There's, I want to do something new. It's a thing. Where do you find out where this Brewster's Millions, free government money is available for anybody who's a non-traditional? How would I find out about it?
It's a good question. Some of the agencies are still who participate in this and who release these solicitations, right, with these various topic areas, Some of them are still siloed and do their own thing. If you want to respond to a Department of Homeland Security SBIR topic, which is those topics are probably going to relate to what is important to that agency at that time, like where are they looking for innovations, and in what bucket of that agency's mission. It's going to be on their usually small business programs website. May be difficult to get to. With a couple Googling keywords, you could find it. The DoD side, I think, has done a really good job of consolidating all of the components and all of the branches, right, who each have their own SBIR program. The Navy has a SBIR program. The Air Force has a SBIR program, et cetera. But they've done a good job of consolidating all of these to one website, which is I believe it's called the DSIP portal, where you could filter and search through and see what's coming for pre-release. That's another really, I'd say, good thing that the DoD has done, right, with, hey, here's what's coming. 30 days from now, we're going to be releasing topics around this. It's going to be, we need AI, search capabilities to help us with encryption on a mobile device. Okay, that's coming in 30 days, and that's for DARPA. Okay, we're looking for, there's so many out there, and a lot of companies, I think, maybe try to guess at what they're going to be. But my best recommendation there is always to say, like, the topics are going to be about what that agency needs. They're looking for the best of the best, and they can sometimes very quickly accelerate from idea to production using the SBIR program, right? But these are posted like solicitations on a website. You're not going to usually find, some of them are on SAM.gov. Like, I think Department of Transportation puts them on SAM.gov. It is a little bit dispersed. The SBA, who manages the program at large, right, has a lot of these resources on their website. The SBIR.gov, is usually the go-to. But you do have to do a little bit of hunting as a business to find where these opportunities are and then where to hit apply.
All right, so let's move this into now the innovation sector at GSA and what you did. So GSA, not being a SBIR agency, I remember you and I received some pushback inside of the organization about being a market maker for SBIR Phase 3s. It turns out there is a very significant need for someone to take an investment that happened at the Navy and turn it into an opportunity that anybody in the government can use based on that investment. So can you describe the launch of the GSA SBIR Phase 3 innovation team that you did and then the successes that you had out of it?
Yeah, so let's see. This was probably 8 years ago, 7 years ago at this point, right around the time that we were standing up GSA's Commercial Solutions Opening Authority and sort of saying we are going to help agencies with non-traditional acquisition buys. Myself and one other person within the GSA assisted acquisition ecosystem, a colleague, right, started to look into, like, hey, we've had a couple customer requests come to us. They want help with a SBIR Phase 3 award. Do we know how to do that? What is that? And can we teach our folks to become very familiar with this authority through a couple of maybe pilot awards, right? And try this out. It was a couple one-off customers, I'd say, 8 years ago, right? A couple in the Air Force. The Air Force was really, I think, an early mover on some of SBIR Phase 3. But essentially what this is, I'll asterisk with what is it and then why were we ultimately very successful in helping agencies award these? Well, the SBIR Phase 3 authority allows companies who have previously won a SBIR Phase 1 or 2 contract or STTR, and not under that pot of required SBIR funds that these agencies have to spend, but any other type of funding. So basically regular contracting, right? What's in your program budget? How are you awarding contracts today outside the SBIR program? You can, on a sole source basis, award these companies a contract to further and extend, the term of art is derive, continue, derive, extend, or complete work done under a prior SBIR contract. You can apply that to a SBIR Phase 3 award on a sole source basis. And we had customers coming to us. When I say customer, I mean an agency who needed contracting help saying, I want to do a SBIR Phase 3 contract for, let's say, $50 million to this company. Can you help us do that? Well, again, similar to how you'd set up any kind of pilot program, we pulled in the best and brightest teammates who are willing. You need kind of forward-leaning contracting officers who are willing to put aside some of the rule book stuff that doesn't apply in non-traditional contracting settings that far, even with the RFO, right? There's still a lot there. And get these requirements on contract. It was a trade-off between learning the authorities. What do you have to do under a SBIR contract? What documents need to be checked off? But it's quite simple. At the end of the day, it looks like a sole source contract, which can sometimes have a negative connotation in government because it means you didn't get competition. It means you might not be getting the best price. It means you maybe didn't consider, the world of other options out there. But I'd say, misconception there is that the SBIR program is actually highly, highly, highly competitive, and that to even get that Phase 1 to be eligible, these companies competed against hundreds of other companies to get that initial contract. And now we are saying, which is a huge priority now, right? Streamline them to the bigger contract because it's what we need. Don't put them through the next big cycle of 6 months of paperwork and compliance and make them sign up for this. No, find a way to streamline the acquisition process to get them on contract and then start delivering the end product to who really needs it. And that is why the SBIR Phase 3 authority, right, as a contracting tool is really, really great and really useful for agencies. And so at GSA, we did like 2 of these, and without really any, I'd say, marketing or, maybe we talked about it at a couple conferences, but not saying, hey, come to us, we're an open shop. It's more like, hey, we trialed this, and this was a really great success story for the Navy, who now has this, and the contracting process only took this many days instead of this many days. And we're, oh, by the way, doing what the SBIR program at large wants us to do, which is commercialize from that initial investment. And customers started lining up. It turns out that agencies really need help with contracting in a lot of different ways because contracting offices are full, they're at capacity, and some maybe don't have training, right, in how to execute this type of contract under this type of authority. So at GSA, we were able to scale our team, get training. We had the right resources and we had the right people. And we were able to develop I'd say, an entire portfolio of these SBIR Phase 3 awards to hundreds of companies, which I feel is a really great success, right? Because it means these industry partners who they got their jump over the valley, right? Like I named my company Over the Valley for a reason, because that, valley of death, a company gets an initial investment or a startup, but then it takes a year and a half to get the government contract, and maybe they go out of business, right? Or lose the key investor in that wait time. The SBIR Phase 3 authority helps companies really accelerate to do this work with the government, whether they stay in government, and keep doing DoD-related work or civilian agency-related work, or pivot back to the commercial sector and continue to which is also a great success story of the SBIR program. There's a couple companies out there who've done that with very prominent commercial products that we use, some of us use every day.
Yeah, my Roomba's right over there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the iRobot vacuum came out of a SBIR topic call for some sort of robotics, and they were able to pivot that technology and they don't have on their website, we came from the SBIR program. Like, nobody cares, but it is definitely a success story outcome that we have to now remind people of in order to get the authority reauthorized and in order to sort of defend that sometimes sole source is the right way, especially when it's already gone through all of this competition and steps, et cetera, to get where they are. So, we were able to build a massive portfolio of contracts that I think really make a difference for the end user, whether that's a warfighter who needs, the best of the best, whatever it is, right? And also a win for these American companies who are creating innovations. It's what the program's supposed to do.
All right. So give me some headline numbers, like how many awards, how many dollars, like what are we talking about in terms of the GSA SBIR work?
On the GSA side alone, we were managing a portfolio. I'd say when I exited government about a year and a half ago, I'd say the portfolio, that the ceiling value was over $5 billion worth of these contracts, of which were active. So some of those were IDIQs with a bunch of task orders running. It was across hundreds of companies. So, not all the dollars going to one company. And, had a staff. Yeah, at the time, I'd say on my team, we had like about 40-ish people, contracting officers, project managers, contract specialists working on these. And then, a sort of the other half, I'd say there's about 80 of us total, right, who were dedicated to helping meet the commercialization objectives of SBIR and to help these companies get to phase 3 and to meet agency requirements through streamlined contracting methods.
So whenever you create a fast lane, authority that allows you to execute without having, the competition aspects of normal procurement, there's always the possibility of abuse, either in the award itself or in the post-award side. And in the middle of operating this the SBIR portfolio, and I started to hear about this concept called a SBIR Mill. There was criticism, and there's politicians, legislative stuff, completely independent of anything that we're doing. Like we don't even know why it's a fight, but we know that it's out there. It's a fight, and it's affecting the possibility of this thing getting reauthorized. So without like belaboring like the nature of SBIR mills and whether or not the authority is good or bad, the whole thing just kind of fell out at the budget process this year. So now there's a new deal. Like now there's the possibility of reauthorizing the SBIR program. Can you talk a little bit about the underlying problem, but mostly about like how it's going to work going forward, like how you understand the new authority will solve some of the problems, and then how things will work in the future?
Right. Yeah. So the SBIR mill, let's say, quote unquote, became a really big issue with the reauthorization this year. So first, the SBIR program has been gone through a reauthorization cycle for over 40 years, right? I mean, it's usually stamped into a 5-year authorization program. I do think this is a good thing. I'd say part of the discussion this year and debate was reauthorize it forever, a permanent reauthorization. I do think there's value in relooking at programs and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Where can you refine the authority? What makes sense for the taxpayer dollars for this moment in time, right? But the SBIR mill issue, I think became a little bit overblown this year because it's a very small, like the definition, right, of a SBIR mill is essentially a company who has won maybe thousands, hundreds or thousands, and there's different kind of qualifiers there, of phase 1 contracts. So, and never moving to phase 3. They've maybe made it a business model on how to submit a successful phase 1 proposal, get $150K, and move on to write the next one for another topic area. It was a limited number of companies, but these companies, again, they've made a business model off of it. And, it's interesting because I do think even some of these companies labeled a SBIR mill are still providing value to the government sometimes, right? Maybe sometimes not. It could be legitimate research papers. Like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about a better way to build a battery this way, like a non-lithium, et cetera, right? But some have taken advantage of it and maybe just become we know what's going to win. We know how to put the words on paper that are going to make the evaluator check the box. And some of these companies have really good lobbyists. So that's the other part, right, where it gets a little bit overblown because a very, very, very small percentage have a really good handle, with their congressman or congresswoman in a particular district where this business is located and they can advocate for. And so, what the the SBIR reauthorization this year, which expired September 30, we're almost there with the reauthorization. As of recording this, the Senate has passed a bill, the Small Business Innovation and, I wrote this down, Economic Security Act, because it's changed names a few times in its, drafting phases. Ideally signed by the House very soon. But the negotiations and 5-month pause on the program this year were very intense and stalled out because of this issue on SBIR mills, right? Are they good? Are they bad? How do we prevent it? How do we prevent misuse of one company eating up all the funds? And part of the resolution to that is in the now compromise bill that has been signed by the Senate as of a few days ago, yesterday, is it's going to let each individual SBIR agency decide the best way to cap businesses, right? They could either set a cap at dollar amount, they could set a cap at how many proposals a company submits to a particular topic area, but they are essentially going to, let's say states' rights right here, they're going to push it down to the agencies to decide how to address the SBIR mill issue rather than the SBIR mill issue being decided from the top, which is a great compromise, to be honest, because this might be limited, right, to a particular where one agency needs all those research papers and another agency doesn't and wants to see new names coming in. So that's part of the SBIR reauthorization bill, right? And that's part of how they're going to control the SBIR mill issue, and we'll see if it solves it. We'll see what the agencies do to set these caps. A lot of bills are written with a lot of great intent and then push it down to the agency to create the process. And you have to wait and see, how does that actually pan out? Does it do what it's intended to do? How is that agency going to track it? That's that's a later problem for them. But now, we can say we came to compromise. So we'll see. I'm optimistic, right, that it'll have its the benefit that it's supposed to do.
So this will open the door to phase 3s again. It'll open the door to a lot of postings for 1s and 2s. So this is great news potentially for the SBIR program. We've kind of ignored or skipped over a bunch of the other non-traditional stuff. So we talked about CSOs a little bit. I know the answer to this one, but let's go back and forth a little bit on this one. What does the word CSO mean? And how is it related to an OT, if at all? And how is that different inside of GSA versus inside of DOW?
Yikes, that's a big question. The government contracting cone comes to mind here. I made a joke before. That's my favorite type of cone, besides an ice cream cone, but which is a very nerdy contracting thing to say. Commercial solutions opening is a process. That sort of thing. It's not a type of contract award. It's not if you go to the FAR and you open up contract types, CSO is not listed as a contract type. That's because it is a process. It's a methodology. So that's sort of asterisk number 1. It is the how to solicit for what you're buying on the government side. And it is a method that can be used to result in a FAR-based contract for some agencies, a non-FAR-based contract for other agencies, a other transaction award if that agency has other transaction authority and agreements officers ready to negotiate those. So CSO is sort of an umbrella term now for a solicitation process that is seeking, as the name says, commercial solutions that are innovative. The CSO process is really interesting and I think fun for acquisition for the buyers, right, as well as for the industry partner, because you're not in FAR Part 15, which is the giant competitive process by which you must solicit and then evaluate proposals, right? You're not in FAR Part 16, where you've isolated it down to a contract vehicle type like an IDIQ or a multiple award IDIQ and then doing a fair opportunity task order process. You're not that. You're also not doing a small business set aside. So the CSO is none of those things, but it is a truly competitive open market process where you can say, without a 50-page RFP, ideally, I have a requirement. I have a problem that I need solved. Here is a couple paragraphs, maybe less, about what I need, right? We're looking for somebody who can solve this gap for us. Tell us what you have. And in response, the CSO is usually a very quick turn process. It's not a 30 days on the street, submit a very long written proposal. The CSO process is usually like put out for a week, 10 days, because the response from industry is also light, kind of a lightweight. It's usually called a solution brief, usually 10 pages or a slide deck, 10 slides, something like that. Tell us about your commercial product or solution that meets this one paragraph problem statement that I just submitted. And so it lowers the barrier to entry. With a CSO, you absolutely get very large integrators competing right against startup XYZ, right? You could have an integrator competing against a software platform company. It allows the government to evaluate, like, it's not apples to apples solutions where they've all spit back your requirements. It is, here's our product, it does this. And then for company B, it's, well, we have a different product and it does this and its capabilities are X, Y, and Z. And the government can really evaluate like apples to kiwis to oranges versus like apples to apples. So from there, the first round of evaluations are pretty quick because the government's only reading a 5-page or 10-slide brief. The government typically down selects, right, into a pitch phase. And you can really tailor that process into whatever is needed based on what you're buying. It could be a demo. It could be a pitch. The CSO authority, as you mentioned, is different across some of the agencies. DOD's is much more broad. It's written, into a different piece of legislation than, for example, GSA's CSO authority was a different part of the NDAA. And when the NDAA gets, marked up and the red lines go in different places. GSA's CSO authority is aligned to DHS. They were written in the same piece of legislation. So the authority right now, I believe, is capped at $25 million per award. DOD's is like up to $100 million, potentially more with, agency approvals, blah, blah. So different pieces of legislation. The processes have been modeled, I think, very similar to each other. Slightly different wording here and there. I think you're going to see, some of the recent administration leadership, right, have pushed for CSOs to be used more broadly. I think we're seeing these solicitations pop up more and more. And so companies are becoming really interested into how to bid on them. And then, molding a CSO bid into a typical proposal process, you sometimes need to unlearn what you already know because it's far more streamlined.
Right. So I've seen a couple of these, and it is faster. It is, it's not quite Shark Tank, but it's closer. And then something gets awarded. Something happens afterwards, and it feels very different than the formal. There's an award notification, there's a debriefing, there's like the protest window and the rigor of spending taxpayer dollars versus, oh wait, that was like really fast. And they also disappear. They pop up and then they just it feels different. Do you think? Actually, let me just give you my opinion on this one. I think this will be really great for like a year and a half, and then oversight will come. The fact that we're moving a little bit faster, we're moving outside of the rules, creates the perception of lack of fairness, even if it was 100% above board. Is there any recommendations here on how to make sure that it stays within like the reason for the authority and the process to safeguard against any of the, the outcome of like, oh yeah, they were just wiring something for their friends.
It's a great question. Something I used to always tell, if a customer agency came to us and said, "I want a CSO," but it's actually this, it's a recompete of my big services contract over here. We'd always kind of have to look at the bullets of what qualifies to use the CSO process and then remind agencies that it's actually not for everything, especially if it's not commercial. That's sort of like that's the big thing. I'm like, if people start buying and using the commercial solutions opening processes for things that are actually non-commercial, that's that you can see the mismatch there because they just want to use the streamlined process because it is easy. It's easier once you kind of know what to do. Um, the other, potential risk area with a CSO that I could see is it allows for more conversation, right, between government and industry. That's always a good thing to help better define the requirements. But sometimes that can also lead to, the government saying, "But I have this costs $7 million. Like, what else can we get? Like, what else can you do?" So it starts to like fill in the statement of work with maybe industry adding on versus like what did the government really need. Yeah, oversight comes these waves of the hot thing that either is being looked at by the IG or by GAO, come and go, right? I think the CSO process is going to stick. That's just my own opinion. I think it could even, this is almost like a blasphemy thing. It could even migrate its way into the FAR at some point as a methodology, right, to do these calls for solutions. So when GSA implemented their CSO, they put the process in the GSAM, the supplement, right, to have at least a place where the process was codified and, hey, your authority can do this. And in general, it's very small because it leaves a lot of tailoring for the acquisition professional to add their own flavor to it, to map to what you're buying. Again, you just got to do what makes sense with what you're buying. But I think it's going to stick because I think that the acquisition workforce is lighter than ever. There's a lot of potential gaps in the workforce right now. The bandwidth is low, just from observation and my own take on, even what I've seen previously. The acquisition folks are always capped out. And so to have a toolbox that can really, like, less papers in the contract file, really good outcome for the buyer, like getting what you need, and it works, with some oversight, it's a good thing. So you don't want to have something go on forever that is being misused. So if it's going to be misused, you want to find out early so you can make the correction. But I think it's going to stay, and I hope it stays because it truly is a faster way to buy, in a competitive manner.
So you said something earlier. I want to go back to on like managing innovation inside of an office and then like avoiding the problems that come from oversight. So, you knew that I had your back to do these authorities, and I knew that, my then senior procurement executive had my back. But I also knew that we had resources to do all of the paperwork compliance that was going to come and cover it. And so the managing the ecosystem that disrupts itself, like the resources to have enough people to do it, it's an interesting mix because you're always going to have somebody who wants to do the new thing. Like there's somebody new came into the agency that, like they're only there for 2 years. They want to be disruptive. They want to like get, this new software tool that they use at company X. And, in the past, you and I were the people who were like, well, you just can't do it. Like you just can't sole source it to your whatever. Like you got to go through these processes. So building something that has the resourcing infrastructure to be able to manage that disruption is absolutely essential. But I think you also need to have, and you'd mentioned this, the contracting officer that has the background in the rules, but also the critical thinking and then the ability to be a chef, like to be, oh, this is the time that I use this ingredient.
Mhm.
So like the FAR rewrite actually gives a fair amount of those things. Like the concept of discussions in the RFO has changed.
Yeah.
So that now allows you to do what you would have done in a CSO in an ordinary solicitation. So I think you're dead on, right on for the likelihood of these procedures becoming more commonplace versus being unique.
Yeah. And, I think that when you're trying something new and, you obviously, you want to try to mitigate risk, but you have to understand, like in government contracting, things happen. And like, it's not a matter of if, somebody is going to misuse something down the line, right? And if you become aware of it, or it's more when. It's like if you do I remember, I feel like you told me this at some point along the way. It's if you do this long enough, like things happen that cause people to question what you do, right? But as long as you have the right people working on it, you've entrusted them to make the right decisions, and you can kind of back up, right? Yeah, you kind of want people to be able to look at what you've done and say, yeah, that was a really good acquisition. Next time, let's try to, add another guardrail here. But we have to lean forward and try new things. And in doing that, some people make mistakes. You might get a protest. You might get GAO coming to look at it later. But these are all part of the process meant to make it better in the long run, right? So I agree. I think we're heading in the right direction. Government should be talking to industry. Industry should be pitching their commercial best practices. And ideally, the outcomes are better for everybody, right? With the buying process sort of really being looked at and changed ideally for the good. So,
All right. So that's the summary of how to do innovation. From Angie Donahoo from Over the Valley Consulting. This has been the Optimized podcast by VisibleThread, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimized podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Chris Hamm, and our guest, Angela Donahoo. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimized podcast.